of the New York City Council Committee on Community Development. My name is Noah Franklin. I'm here on behalf of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. Serving low-income communities, FPWA strongly urges that worker cooperatives play a key role in the city's long-term to lift families out of poverty and unemployment. And FPWA's developed some recommendations, also a report which was referenced about ways that the new mayoral administration and the city council could implement existing worker cooperatives and more. And I'm going to abbreviate my testimony that cover some key points from it. Just to clarify, worker cooperatives are businesses owned and managed democratically by the employees. Worker cooperative businesses produce an array of economic benefits for low-income communities and effectively reduce basis. Across the country, there are community groups, progressive think tanks, and elected officials seeking to integrate worker and workforce development policy as a means of creating economic security, jobs, livable wages to lift cities. We think that New York City, too, can be a leader nationally in this regard, and it's because New York excellence, a size where the city has potential to set de facto standards. And if to achieve new policies that support worker cooperatives in New York City would not only be the first of its kind, but also serve as a model for cities and other countries. For the last dozen years, New York City has encountered persistent economic barriers that have trapped more than 1 out of 5 New Yorkers in poverty. And low-wage jobs do not provide enough economic boost to lift these New Yorkers out of poverty. Government development programs have made insufficient headway in reducing the number of low-wage workers. And although unemployment levels in New York City have dropped in recent months, they're still an astounding high 8.1% as of January 2014, leaving hundreds of thousands of without work. I think that's about 350,000 New Yorkers. So, given this reality, New York City's efforts to reduce inequality should not just be an opportunity for realignment, but reinvestment. The development of work new long-term strategy to address inequality. There are examples of low-wage workers in New York City who have nonprofits and seen their hourly wages increase from $10 to $25 per hour within just a few years. In 4 years of starting their house cleaning company, Si Se Puede, worker owners, many of whom, some of them are here today, tripled their wages to as much as $25 an hour. Yet, government support for worker cooperatives is a relatively new issue. As a result, public and private financing, legal and technical assistance, incubators, and other resources for expanding the cooperative movement are limited in availability. This lack of public support has created a barrier to the development of worker cooperatives in New York City. So let's talk a little bit about what done. And I can also kind of respond to some of what the city talked about and be a little more specific of where we think things can be for the city. On the administration side, and I'll talk a little about the council. So one decisive action, the proclamation, taking a loud and public stance in support of worker cooperatives and raising awareness of the benefits. I think one of they need more of the support from the executive. I think that's something that's really important. Also, by providing advice, regulatory assistance, funding tools specifically tailored to worker cooperatives, the New York City Economic Development Corp could play a larger role in growing the number of cooperatives in New York City. First, FPWA proposes that take on worker cooperatives as a functional horizontal sector itself across different industries, similar to its things is that we've heard is that the NYC specializes in different industries, and they can also particular capacity buildings in industries. And so a functional horizontal will go across all the different fields and allow them to specialize and develop work cooperatives. NYCDC should also connect its markets to find which industries offer the best potential for the growth of worker cooperatives and support those industries with. In addition, NYCDC currently provides grants and incentives to businesses and can expand the criteria to include work. NYCDC could also develop subcontracting opportunities for worker cooperative businesses on the city's infrastructure, such as construction projects. In regard to small business services, FPW proposes, and Small Business Service referenced this, about including the worker cooperative model as part of the curriculum that Small Business Services uses for training individual businesses. And this has a big impact because it educates business owners of the possibility. One of the key things is creating a cooperative model that people could utilize. So, and also creating awareness about their organizations, you hear from Omar, that provide technical assistance also. So that curriculum, while it seems simple, it has a profound ripple effect. SBS can also connect cooperatives, which typically have trouble obtaining traditional bank loans, with alternative lenders such as credit unions or nonprofit organizations that provide investment capital, and SBS referenced that. SBS should also promote procurement opportunities to prioritize existing and emerging worker cooperatives. Furthermore, SPSS should provide training and development cooperatives that would allow them to bid for city contracts, such as how they might respond to requests for proposals and submit proposals. Finally, in relation to SPSS, it should provide grant funding for technical assistance to providers, which was money that came through the worker cooperatives and increase the survival rate of worker cooperative businesses. I know there's on the workforce side. How do you help connect people with jobs? And so I wanted to speak briefly about what, and we think that worker cooperatives are a useful tool to achieve workforce development goals, and that existing programs can be refashioned to support worker cooperatives. The first one is creating a city program to help unemployed people operating businesses that aren't paying taxes to start formal worker cooperative businesses. We also think the city workforce contracts should include provisions that permit job placement for unemployed persons in a worker cooperative as an approved placement. Having city workforce development contracts provide funding for capacity building, industry skills training, and resource development for worker cooperatives would to help the worker cooperatives grow. Many workforce development organizations and they can help support worker cooperatives. So just to give you a picture of how these programs might look in the real world, it's helpful to provide a walkthrough of how participants might go from a workforce development program to being employed long-term at a work. One example, people referenced it before, 5 years ago, the Center for Family Life in Brooklyn was running a traditional employment center and go on job interviews. As the economy got worse, staff noticed it was getting harder and harder for people with language barriers to find work. They developed a 10-week educational program for women that would attend an ESL class at the nonprofit and became interested in worker cooperatives. This program prepared workers for their new business, including training in customer service, marketing products, and the challenges of democratic business governance. The women later went on to form what is now CC Puede, a house cleaning cooperative. Now lastly, just to talk a little bit about the council and what the council can do. I think for awareness is really important, and representatives of the New York City's 23 cooperatives could be invited to attend a council ceremony to receive a proclamation announcing the city's support and recognition of cooperative businesses during Worker Cooperative Month in October. Although some funding has been provided in the past by the council, FPW believes that a new council initiative, a citywide initiative, for more specific high-need communities or populations, such as the council initiative for worker cooperative jobs with the highest city unemployment rates. And looking, we've taken time to look at that, and there are, you could look at, let's say, the 16 or 18 top council districts with the highest unemployment rates. That Councilmember Freilla and Councilmember Rosenthal also mentioned about legislation, and we to reduce the financial documentation required for worker cooperatives, and this was some of the process talking about with qualification of 51% ownership that would allow worker cooperatives to qualify other resources such as city loan funds and the minor and women-owned business program. In addition, Councilman Rosenthal mentioned this about something we think introduce legislation to establish business or contracting set aside at worker cooperatives or other social economy businesses. And there are a number of other things I mentioned too that you can always use the can. Some of the things the cities can do, but with a stick approach with legislation could force the city to take greater initiative. So in closing, while worker cooperatives are not in themselves a panacea for economic distress, FPW believes that development of worker cooperatives in New York City should be part of a long-term community development strategy to address inequality. And we thank Councilmember Rowe, the Community Development Committee, for understanding the importance of public input on worker cooperatives, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Hi, thanks everyone so much. Good morning, Chairperson, the New York City Council Committee on Community Development. My name is Christopher Michael. I'm a founding director of Worker Cooperatives. This is the local grassroots business association for worker cooperative businesses. We represent approximately 25 worker cooperative businesses. That's including about 3,000 workers, nonprofit support organizations, legal service providers, and academic centers. I'd like to thank everyone again so much. This is really a dream for us to have this opportunity to submit testimony on how the city can help support working families by helping create worker cooperatives. To see that Elizabeth Crowley is here, who has a background from the Consortium for Worker Education. I'd also like to thank Greg Bishop for their participation here, the testimony that they provided, and the testimony that was elicited by our council members. With Noah, I have a lot of testimony I won't be able to read. I'd like to also just take a moment to also thank the council for its help in promoting worker justice of all varieties. Its hard efforts in the last years to pass the Earned Sick Time Act, the Living Wage Law, and I know that we have a lot more exciting stuff to come. Again, in the testimony that was just provided, there was an incredibly amount of sort of heartening talk. The focus on MWE programs and the sort of difficult fit. We have companies like Cooperative Home Care Associates, the largest worker cooperative in the United States, over 2,000 workers. Now, I've actually had to gather signatures on a couple of afternoons. It's up in the South Bronx. Have to tell you from firsthand experience, you know, it's almost 99% of color. And the fact that it's difficult for this organization to get MWE status, you know, that's a problem. Reason in the world why we can't adapt our MWE program, and I was also heartened in a meeting with Greg Bishop last week to talk to legal and see how we can work that out. I also like Noah's suggestions about having a council ceremony. I think those are wonderful ideas that can draw attention and build awareness around worker cooperative businesses. Of introducing worker cooperative training and education into the regular program. I mean, it would be, again, Omar Freilla going down to William Street and teaching the worker cooperative night at the, 8 program that SBS offers, their entrepreneurship boot camp. We've also talked...
Does he know you're volunteering him for that?
Talking volunteer.
Yeah, that's right. He'll be there. Again, also heartened that we're speaking about things like financing, thinking about an industrial or sectoral approach. SBS has already, in our email communication since last week, provided the annual procurement indicators report. In that meeting, when we were discussing the $16.5 billion worth of supplies, services, and allocates every year through 40,500 transactions. So that was what was transacted last. To my knowledge, none of that has flowed into worker cooperative coffers, and I thank Councilmember Andy King for the question, what have you guys already done? You know, so looking back to last year, what was done? $16.5 billion, and not a dollar of that goes into a worker cooperative business that's democratically owned and controlled by New York City, New York citizens. It was also quite interesting when we're thinking about sort of what sectors might be most accessible, and a report issued by NYC EDC as to which sectors would be best. But immediately, Kyle Kimball, president of well, out of that 16.5, he said, we do 9 billion of that is in construction. For sectors, industries that we can start to build, and I like Chair Arroyo's language here, that and in helping to incubate, create, provide the business planning, not just the financing, or for somebody to sit down in a chair and get a pat on the back, but for New York City to provide a direct and active planning, the foreplanning, the advanced planning to create these businesses, to then go to the workforce roles, to do the hiring, to hire the senior managers, the professionals that will also be necessary for a major construction business. It's interesting to think, when we look at nationally, the largest construction company in Italy is a worker cooperative. So we can do medium scale, we can do this at large scale. I love the suggestion. It's a staple of my phone calls over the past couple of months, that we set separate procurement targets, that we set separate procurement targets for worker cooperative businesses. Finally, I'd just like to go back to Noah's suggestion that we really have an opportunity to really make our mark here as far as New York City Council. We have a new national standard. This really is something that's new. The Bay Area, Cleveland, Chicago, they're not doing what we're about to do. Okay, this is really something new. I'd like to end with a quote from Yale political scientist Robert Dahl. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago, what sort of the grandfather of political science. You guys probably all studied him in undergraduate. He's challenged the American people. He asked us to consider whether we have the firmness of purpose and the clarity of vision to assert the priority of democracy over property and undemocratic authority within corporate enterprises. And I'd just like to say that I think that the members of our network, the employees, community organizers, lawyers, and financiers who plan to testify today, they do possess this firmness of purpose and this clarity of vision, and I hope that you...
Omar?
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to the chair, Councilmember Arroyo, and also to the other members of the committee, Rosenthal and Councilmember Palma. My name is Omar Freilla.
We've been joined by Councilmember Palma.
So my name is Omar Freilla, and I'm the founder and coordinator of Green Worker Cooperatives. We are a nonprofit Bronx-based incubator of worker cooperatives, and we are proud to be that. We are proudly based in the Bronx. This is our roots and our home, and we exist for the sole reason of creating worker-owned cooperatives, particularly worker-owned cooperatives that are really able to transform our communities. And we see this as our reason because we see in the a way to really create a different kind of economy, to transform what economic development looks like, and traditionally is are about environmental justice. We are about empowering workers. We are about retaining. Historically, the field of economic development in our communities, particularly for the Bronx and New York City and low-income communities of color, but what it has looked like is creating opportunity, and economic and community development has looked like offering incentives to state to create an influx of higher income individuals, or gentrification, and creating an influx of low-wage employers. So whether they're retail or truck distribution centers, that's the kind of and that is not the kind of economic development that we want. Economic and community development, and what we are out for, are really businesses that are able to transform communities, to keep wealth in the neighborhoods. And that is really what a worker cooperative is about at the end of the day. A little unfamiliar, worker cooperatives are businesses that are owned by the people who work there, plain and simple. One shape, one member, one vote. Profits are distributed amongst the members, and the members are the people who work there. So from the perspective of anyone who's cared about the environment, who's cared about public safety, or just cared about being a good neighbor, a good that's owned by the people who work there, you're more likely to have a business that's really grounded in the community. The needs of its community, because nobody likes to gas their own neighbors. You know, it's not good neighborly practice. Is really the benefit of worker cooperatives, and we see here a real opportunity to create that. I'd like to thank you again. I didn't mention this, but I want to say it because it hasn't been said. This is really a historic occasion. As far as I or anyone here is aware, has ever held a hearing on worker cooperatives. So, and worker cooperatives have been around for a good while, you know, much longer than 100 years. Worker cooperatives have been around for a good long while, so it's really wonderful that this is actually happening. We see here, and I'm abbreviating my testimony from what was submitted earlier. I do want to share that the pages are a little heavy. Our work is innovative. We see what is happening in New York is that we are really setting trends in the field of worker cooperative development. The work of the Center for Family Life has really been work as an organization at Green Worker Cooperatives has also been trailblazing. We use a model that really focuses on entrepreneurs. Turning that idea into a real worker cooperative reality. When we started, when doing this, we adopted this model of focusing on entrepreneurs just a few years ago, and in that time we've had 5 different organizations in 5 different cities adopt the model that we use. We started a program called the Co-op Academy. It's a boot camp business. They want to create a business as a worker-owned cooperative. We work with them to turn that idea to really flex and bring on people to design logos, to design websites, lawyers to incorporate it, wonderful lawyers just out of the goodness of their heart and hard work, folks like the Urban Justice Center, CUNY School of Law. So lots of time in creating an innovative model. And that's the approach that we've been using. In that time, in just the past few years, from all sorts of fields, from catering, providing food for educational services, film, financial services. So we have a number in the works. Some of them are here, and actually the good folks of Caracol Interpreters Cooperative are providing the interpretation academy. So we're really excited that they're here and a part of this, and though also a bit disappointed chipping in to be able to get them here because it's not common practice for the city council. So we actually did a collection to make sure that they're able to translate for some of the members that are here. So that's a bit of our background. I want to present just some of the challenges that we face. Our ways out, many of which have been addressed, the bigger picture, but some as an organization doing cooperative development. The first is an overall lack of awareness of worker cooperatives. Cooperatives barely exist in New York City. They're 23. That's less than a drop in a bucket. That's a fraction of a fraction of. Why? It's a common question. Well, it's fairly simple, straightforward to say they don't exist because they're not created. That they exist. So if people don't know that worker cooperatives are an option, how is it even possible for anyone to go to a lawyer and say, I want to incorporate and I want to do it as a worker cooperative? It's just not an option. If anyone goes to small business services today, or they go to any entrepreneurship training program, with the exception of if they come to Green Worker, if they go to Center for Family Life, what they'll be told is you don't want to work with other people. They're discouraged. So we come in with a completely different perspective. So it's just not an option that people are aware of. So a way around that is really promoting an aggressive public relations campaign in New York City. The same way that we see, don't pour on the pounds. That's the kind of aggressive campaign that we need to see in New York City to really make it known that this exists as an option. So the proclamations, getting small business services, which they have said, and they've said to us and they've said here, that they were willing to entertain this, of actually incorporating our work and cooperatives into the curriculum, and sending people who have ideas to cooperative developers is really a huge step in the right direction. that can immediately generate incredible interest across the city in creating worker cooperatives. A second problem that we've encountered is just an overall lack of capacity in organizations to really support cooperatives for the long haul. For our organization, we are a four-person team, folks working together. We really piece it together. We've been known to make gold out of straw. And it is something that for us, we support, and we've created an innovative program, but we don't necessarily have the resources to support a cooperative that goes through our academy. Support them to take them from the idea stage to creating the business plan and then growth, to really ramp up their with the city, or they can get a contract with a large organization that does business. So this is incredible. So really creating a funding line, at the city level for cooperative development explicitly. Development organizations, co-op developers. We're in the Bronx. We do believe in cooperatives in the Bronx. We'd like to start with a Bronx incubator for worker cooperatives. And I think we've got an incredible amount of potential to be able to. Conversation the other day with our good friends at Nos Quedamos, We Stay Nos Quedamos, who have, we've been talking about creating. So the opportunities are there. So these are the kinds of things that we really want to see happen. A third area, and this is it's a question that comes up, is just the lack of access to capital for worker cooperatives. It's one that was touched on earlier, but there are some very real problems with the way things currently work. Currently, if anyone wants to start up a worker cooperative or has a worker cooperative and they're looking for a loan, similar to the problems with MWB certification, they face even greater hurdles when they're looking for investors. Two principal hurdles. One is the common requests for credit references and personal guarantees. It's one thing if you've got a one-person business and you ask for a personal guarantee, that's pretty straightforward. But if you've got a 10-person business or a 50-person business, or let alone a 2,000-member business like Cooperative Home Care Associates, which is also based in the Bronx, there's greater odds of being rejected at the door. So, creating the opportunities for dedicated funding, loan programs. And we have some great examples. The Working World is an investment lender that operates here in New York City. We work closely with them to actually provide funding loans for people who go through our co-op academy. So that's another problem that we see happening, is that cooperatives are not able, another area to really consider as an opportunity is making cooperatives, and this is something available at the city level, is having cooperatives be preferred contractors. So this was mentioned a little earlier, but I want to touch on it because it's really important. If a cooperative is able to say, we've got a contract with the city, or in any capacity, whether it's to provide language translation services, or whether it's catering, or any type of function, then that just increases their own lendability. It raises their ability to get funding from other sources, whoever they are, and it makes them much more likely to be able to grow as an entity. So these are just some of the things that are available that are available as options that we really believe would transform economic development in New York City, grow businesses that not only sound good, not only are have a great intentions, but they're really businesses that intrinsically and inherently are connected and they're businesses that for very few people currently, but for many more, really create the opportunity to do something that very few of us outside of community-based grassroots organizations, members experience, and that's actually engagement and democracy. Being able to make a difference and be able to have a say, to take an idea, put it on the table with other members, and really create something, and talk it forth, and really say at the end, I'm an owner. This is my business, and I have a say, not just what happens here at work, but I know from practice that I can do this. Community. People who are members of worker cooperatives, I'm very fond of saying, are people who can really transform their communities. They make great friends. They make great marriage partners. On many different levels, people who practice communication at a much higher level of human interaction and understanding. And that's the kind of economy that we want to create, putting people first. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Omar, so do you think that there is a particular personality, and I guess this goes for all of you, that is appropriate for engaging in a worker cooperative? We're not psychiatrists or psychologists here, but personality traits that individuals that are in successful businesses have versus others that are more bossy and control-oriented?
I think there are a few of us jumping to answer that one. I'll share from our experience, and we particularly focus on the entrepreneur. So the people who have an initial idea and want to start up a business. So these are also the people who will go through the workforce centers and go to different entrepreneurship training programs who are currently being lost in the system. The people that come to us and say they want to start a business are everyday people from all walks of life, unemployed, employed, you know, making a little bit of money, making no money, making ends meet, or, you know, doing well. But they're people who also have a sense of responsibility to their community. It's becoming more and more common with the field of socially responsible business or social enterprises. People come, and that's actually a key characteristic of any entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs aren't just out for the money. I've known that by the end of the day, or when they leave the planet, that they've left their mark on the world. Us commonly say, you know, I want to be able to create this business that's going to be able to take my vision and put it out there in the world. And so that's a very common characteristic. But across all walks of life, it's people who are really out. It helps if you've got good communication skills. It's not something that, you know, it's not taught, it's not learned. And most of us, we learn to be employers. We don't learn to be business owners. So it's not something that's ingrained in many of us. It's in some that is really available. That it's available and it's out there. But I've also found that people who do not look like, or who do not seem to be the ideal communicator or the person who is about building community, but who are just there for a job, I've seen people just open up space in the expectation that they have a say, and that there is a regular basis where they have to come to decisions, make decisions together. I've seen and worked closely with one particular gentleman who was very abusive, you know, in his home life and in his own relationship, and in relationships with others, very combative. And I've seen this man break down in meetings, and I've served as the conflict mediator, you know, within the groups. And I've seen that individual over time, you know, be someone who completely flipped and did a 180, and then became someone who looked for consensus, and was actually able to open up and share what was irking him about what was going on in a meeting. So it takes and can be all kinds, and there's a space for everybody.
I would just add here that, of course, there are different scales and sizes for worker cooperatives. In Mondragon in Spain, of course, there's an 80,000 member worker cooperative. Worker cooperatives, when you look at worker cooperatives, you're talking about two different things. The two, when we're speaking about what type of person who might belong to a worker cooperative. And on the other hand, we have participation. Participation is involved in all types of firms. You might be working at Goldman Sachs, and they want your participation. What worker cooperatives do is they provide a floor of control. So if the maximum amount of your participation annually is your one member, one company, well then that is your participation. That is your control over the company. You are a worker member. So it takes all kinds. It depends on the size of the worker cooperative, but there's no reason. There's no reason cooperative. And moreover, I would say that I think the idea, the dignity that comes with working and in a democracy with your other coworkers, that dignity belongs to everybody.
No comment.
Okay. Okay, so this question is specifically for, and in your testimony, that the council could introduce legislation to reduce the required for worker cooperatives with large number of worker owners, to etc. Do you have recommendations, language that you want us to consider?
We could
Because, you know, kidding. You come here with a recommendation, you leave with homework that requires you to do some more work to help inform the work that we need to do here. So if you haven't thought about some, then give us a, and you know, Thomas will be your contact person on language that you want to share with us that we should consider.
There are other models in other cities that we could look at for this. I think we'd first like to see what Small Business Services is willing to do on their end in terms of how much they're willing to make changes to their, they've talked about some legal, see how open they are to work with the council to try to introduce legislation.
Okay, so I don't want you to see what.
Okay.
I want you to recommend something to us so that then we can working with, because we do not recommend to us, we engage the administration and the agency in a conversation about whether that language works, doesn't work, what modifications need to happen, and usually introductions come in, and by the time, you know, for example, intro 1 is introduced, when we adopt this intro has been amended and massaged because there is agreement that some changes need to be tweaked.
We could certainly come up with model legislation.
Don't hinder yourself with what you think you already know.
Okay.
I hope I.
We'd like to see what
Yeah.
put forth legislation and see how they
Possibilities cannot be
respond.
created optimally with already always into a little box. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. And Omar, testimony, the item number 3, the lack of outright bias against worker cooperatives for lenders and investors, resulting in reduced access to capital. Is there an example of a successful entity that got through that hindrance, and what made them successful, if you have an example?
I have that example.
Okay, all right. Councilmember King?
It's a very common problem. I think we heard across the system. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, again, and I want to thank the 3 of you for your testimony and your information and helping me worker cooperatives. I do have about 4 questions that I just want to throw to all of you, but in the essence of time, I'm going to ask answers. We have a number of people who don't want to testify for the rest of this afternoon. So I know there's 20. Can you tell me how many individuals, overall individuals, are participating in worker cooperatives throughout the city? What is the ethnic makeup of them? What plan is there to? There are no worker cooperatives that exist in today, and what is the success rate? Has been, you know, have been some that have been successful, and have there been some failures? And how do we engage communities who don't know anything about them to the table?
Maybe you want to start, Chris?
Sure. I can give some concise answers to those. So, New York City, they constitute about 3,000 workers. The bulk of them do belong to Cooperative Home Care Associates in the South Bronx. They have about 2,000 workers right there. Again, primarily we're speaking about women of color because Cooperative Home Care Associates is, and again, I sat there gathering signatures for a prospective worker cooperative federal credit union. This is a few years ago, and you know, it's all women of color, and it's what you would, you know, your typical sort of, you know, a lot of Caribbean background, you know, some African American at CH, Central American, very few Asian Americans, but very sparse. And then, of course, in the room here today, a lot of the members of the Center for Family Life worker cooperatives. A lot of them, from my understanding, are Latin origin. Many from Mexico. In terms of economic literature on the topic, is that worker cooperatives have an equal or greater success rate than traditional worker cooperatives. So the is getting them started. I think it goes back to sort of a classic collective action problem, right? If you've got three, it's really easy for those three people to get together, make a plan, and spend the money. If you're trying to get 2,000 people, you know, it's a collective action problem, and that's why I think it's really so important for City Council to focus on that strategic business planning that we can provide ahead of time. In terms of introducing these ideas to new communities, I mean, that's the work that, you know, Green Worker Cooperatives, Center for Family Life, and New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives is trying to do every day.
I'm going to think in response to your question, I mean, that's why having reforms happen at the city level is so important. You know, anybody can open up a small business, but you face all these obstacles as a work cooperative. But doing reforms at the city level would really allow it to scale up the size of worker cooperatives and open the door for many more to form. So I think that's why city reforms are so critical. And in other cities where they've had reforms, they've seen the size grow significantly because of having it happen on more the macro level than just the individual businesses. Rather than going one by one, encouraging one business at a time, you're opening the door for many to form.
Noah, you say the size or the number?
The number of worker cooperatives have grown based on reforms on the city level.
Okay. And just to wrap it up with this, you mentioned that the majority of the people who participate in these cooperatives are women of color. Do you find that because that you're servicing people of color, there's been any discrimination when it comes to loan practices or any other things that you ethnicity of the people who are trying to organize this?
That is a great question to consider and perhaps bring before some of the agencies directly, and to look at their own practices. But it's a reality, and so it's a reality that communities of color deal with. So it is very likely, I certainly would not say for certain, that that's something that does exist.
Okay. If you can get back, please. That's something I think we need to tackle, because that's where inequality really starts. We don't have that conversation often. It's not so much the haves and the have-nots, but in this country, a lot of things is based on the color of your skin. So let's see how we bring that to.
I would like to add, though, that in addition to you know, any direct instances of overt racism or in discrimination in lending practices, there's also a fundamental imbalance in access to capital. And so for those of us, you know, the Bronx is the poorest part of New York City. It's the poorest county in New York City. And for decades. So, and it's no accident then that when we look at just the entrepreneurship rates, they are much lower in the Bronx than in other parts of New York City. And the businesses that are available are really providing low-wage work. So there has to be a recognition of access of capital that's available, and the background and the resources that people must to start up businesses. So there has to be some effort by the city then to really counteract that and to really serve as a counter and create a different direction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We got work to do.
Okay, Councilmember Crawford.
Thank you, Chair Arroyo. And I'm not going to have a chance to say this again because I have to leave for a 12 o'clock meeting. But I'm really glad, and I think that, you know, between the people who are here today and the testimony we've heard, this hearing, like no other that I've been at the City Council, I'm encouraged by, you know, look at other countries, especially when you mentioned the Basque region of Spain or Bologna in Italy. Just the company in Spain, you said employs 80,000 members. I'm curious to know, is the government there just given all the work of that? I guess they're doing mostly construction and manufacturing. How do they get so much work? And when you have it so large, like I was thinking, you know, these cooperatives are more for small businesses with employees of under 50. You know, there's got to be a chief executive officer, a financial officer. part of the company, you know, they have larger stake in the company? Do they get paid like 10 times or 20 times as much? How do those complicated things get worked out when you have such a large corporation?
Sure. Again, it's one worker, one vote, and it's recognized that a worker isn't necessarily like, you know, a burly guy with a blue, you know, trousers on, right? We're all workers here. Everybody in this room is a worker unless you're fortunate enough to be independently wealthy. And so the CEO, the CFO, middle management, the year at that annual member meeting, they get one vote also because they're also valued as workers. Hierarchy in human organization doesn't mean that it can't be democratically controlled. You guys, of course, should know that better than anybody else, right? You guys, so to speak, are the democratically elected managers, the democratically elected, you know, almost CEOs, you know, or board of directors. What you are, and it's the same exact thing.
In some ways, the city is like a cooperative.
That's it. That's found all. That's found.
Doesn't make much
Exactly.
comparison
That's
to
found.
a teacher.
That's found all over the literature, that comparison between geographically based democratic government and a cooperative, like a worker cooperative business.
But a business should, here, we just balance our budget.
Right.
So, so who gets that excess, you know, between 8,000
so sort of in terms of international ethical standards, CEOs, high level, where you have 80,000 members, high levels make no more than maybe 6 times, tops 8 times what the U.S. right now. The highest paid CEO gets paid 475 times what the average paid worker does. So these are international ethical standards, and there's a reason why those ethical standards can be enforced, because at the end of the day, there's that floor of democratic worker control. So the democratically elected board of directors isn't going to allow a higher pay ratio. And the salaries that are set on an annual basis for floor level workers, beyond those annual salaries, it's typically the case that excess surplus distributed equally among all workers. Also, to the question of where the business comes from, Mondragon, we'll wrap it up. Mondragon's international market, which is a sort of separate model from what's done in Bologna, where 80% of Bologna, the city of Bologna's social services are contracted out through worker cooperatives. That's something I think that we're maybe a little bit more looking at here today with New York City. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna. Oh, Councilmember Palmer. I'm sorry.
Omar, and I believe I heard Noah speak a little bit about funding as well. I'm just curious to know, in terms of funding, we know that the city doesn't dedicate any funding to these types of programs, but any funding possibilities at the federal level, the state level, have you engaged that, you know, government at those levels? I believe when I came in, or you were speaking a little bit about maybe, and correct, any council members dedicating some of their funding to something like this? Am I correct?
Yeah,
Through discretionary?
it was done through discretionary. I think this speaker, like a speaker initiative last 2 years, did provide funding for worker cooperatives. Yeah, not a
Right.
lot. So,
And it was.
I mean, I
it
think
was
what they
about
would-
125,000.
I think I mean, I think they did mention a number of loan funds that the city has that theoretically worker cooperatives could qualify for, but haven't yet. I mean, I think part of it is the obstacle, the sort of, because of the nature of the structure of the work cooperatives, that's prohibited them from qualifying. I mean, I think that they could. I mean, I think there'd have to be changes made to make them more eligible so they could get those loan funds. Has said they talked about alternate lenders they could bring into their pool that would be more open to worker cooperatives. I think that.
And then recognizing that the Bronx has, again, the highest poverty. Omar, have you engaged the Borough President's office in terms of BOEDC and how creative BOEDC can get in terms of becoming one of those lenders for worker cooperatives?
So we've had some initial discussions with BOEDC about creating lending opportunities for cooperatives. I would say they're still stuck in the same dynamic that lenders associated with the city are, using the same format, the same matrix or rubric for making decisions about cooperatives, as treating them the same as any traditional business. Inherent bias when you have more people who are owners.
So then I will respectfully ask Chair Reyes that can you make some recommendations to this committee that we can take back and and BOEDC and loop them into the conversations that need to happen between the administration and the city council to make sure we can move this forward.
Absolutely, and I'll add also that out of just having very bootstrapped approach to financing, and we are very commonly engaged in crowdfunding for starting up co-ops, and we actually work with a Bronx Campus High School at Stevenson campus, to help a group of students start a worker cooperative company to make clothing, and that's something that the school actually crowdfunded us to be able to come in. So it's been incredible on their part, but there's opportunities all over the city to be able to do that. And so it's really about creating the opportunities so, there are funds and there are incentives to be able to make that happen on a big scale.
Okay, thank you. And delegation, I think it's a great indication to you that you have to move this conversation also to the level of the borough president, and we can certainly help to do that. Councilmember King, of the Black Latino Asian Caucus, and one of the things that I am looking forward to working with the caucus, create a working group that can help us shape a recommendation to the moving forward, and that we will immediately engage in after this hearing, you and the other members that are here to provide testimony. I thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with me. Forward to the continued conversation. This is going to be work in progress, and I don't think that we're going to be able to do what needs to be done immediately, but we can certainly begin with baby steps towards the future of a process that can create a real strong support mechanism for the incubation and the creation of worker cooperatives that we can grow and become successful small, medium-sized, or large businesses, because I think we need to that it's not going to be a one-size-fit-all. And with that, that means that we have a lot. Really truly appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us and for your leadership on this conversation. I walked into it. I'm not that smart, but I know a good thing when I see it. So thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Our next panel, and now we're going to start the clock, and we're going to do a couple of things. Experts in the room that are going to share some insights with us, but we also have some workers in the room, and we're going to flip back and forth between the advocates and the experts and with the boots on the ground, people who made it happen for them and their neighbors. So we're going to start the first panel of workers. Yes, Thomas? Okay. So I am butcher your names. So I apologize for that in advance, and hope that when you begin your testimony that you correct my butchering of your name for the record. Jamila Jones. Oh, where is Jamie here? Okay. Edith Peña Harper. Bang. Elizabeth Mendoza. Alexander Lopez, Rates, Jamie, hi, come on in. Okay, so Jamie, who's Edith? Okay, come on, join us. Margarita?
Yes.
Okay. Elizabeth? Alexander?
Margarita.
Alexander Lopez? Rosa? Paraquibay?
No.
Rosa? Okay, good. Join us. Alexander? Going once? Going twice? Okay. No, I'm in a different pile, I guess. Okay, ladies. A little box over there with 300, it's not the movie. It's the amount of time that you have to give us your testimony. We will accept it for the record. Summarize your statements. Give us your story. That's what I'm interested in hearing. That's what we're interested in hearing. So you begin when you're ready. You choose whatever. Speak into the mic. Handle it by the base. Don't pull it by the stem. And you're in, están en familia, so come and we're good, okay? All right.